Welcome to the ultimate guide to happiness. It's time we take a very grounded look at this idea of happiness and how happiness actually works. Now, I've covered this topic in the past a bit, but now we're going to go real serious, real in-depth, and real practical. I've been studying psychology and philosophy for so long now, so deeply, that happiness has become so clear to me as to what actually makes people happy and what doesn't. And I've experimented with so many different things, with materialistic pursuits and spiritual pursuits and starting businesses and so forth. And so I have quite a bit of experience here that I want to share with you. And even though I have all this understanding of happiness, don't get this wrong, that doesn't mean that I'm always happy. In fact, the biggest obstacle that I personally face with my own happiness is with my health. And boy, you don't appreciate how important your health is to your happiness until you lose your health and you start having some chronic health problems the way that I've been having. But even though that's the case, and that's been sort of handicapping me in my happiness, still, I've been able to reach levels of happiness that few humans can comprehend. And so I'll share some of those with you as well. But in this episode, mostly, I'm not going to get too spiritual with you. We're going to keep it very grounded because I really want to help you to set your lifestyle up in a way where you can achieve true happiness. And it's not just about attaining some ultimate Buddhahood or something like that. And I can help you to avoid many of the common traps that people run into when they try to pursue happiness. So this is going to be some very life-transforming information if you listen and apply it. I'm going to give you lists of things that will make you happy, very concrete things, and I'll give you lists of things that will not make you happy. That'll make it impossible for you to ever be happy. So stick around for that. That's the second half of this episode. But first, a little bit of sort of the background and setting this up and giving some context and some general guidelines about how this works. So what is happiness? That's not an obvious question. It's not obvious what it is and how to get it. And yet, can you see how important it is to answering that question? Because ultimately, what do you want in your life? You want a happy life. That's ultimately what all of your manipulations and schemes boil down to, isn't it? All of your chasing and seeking, you're looking for a happy life, but it's not obvious how to construct one. What if you spend decades pursuing happiness in the wrong ways and end up ultimately miserable? What if the things you think will make you happy actually won't? What if not all people are made happy by the same things? That's a really important point. A lot of people don't consider that. So the first thing you got to understand about happiness is that it's a very tricky and counterintuitive thing. And really understanding happiness is a feature of doing philosophy, proper philosophy. Philosophy is not just empty theorizing the way they do in universities. An important part of philosophy is figuring out how happiness works. Or otherwise, the question is known as, how do you live the good life, the quote-unquote good life? What is the good life, the happy life? Well, wisdom appreciates that happiness is counterintuitive and that the good life is not the obvious life and it's not the default life that people live. So you have to do something extra, something special, something counterintuitive to get the good life. But what is that? Well, we'll discuss that here, but go check out my previous episode called The Counterintuitive Nature of Life, where I talk about counterintuitiveness. So happiness is one of those examples of counterintuitiveness we've talked about. Now here, I'm going to say something that might shock you a little bit, especially if you're into spiritual work. I'm going to say this. My claim is that the notion of unconditional happiness is a ridiculous ideal. In practice, this is impossible. You're not going to get unconditional happiness. In fact, your happiness as a human is highly, highly conditional and fragile, even if you are a so-called spiritual person. Now, of course, the more spiritual you become, the less conditional your happiness gets. But this idea that you're going to reach some sort of unconditional state of happiness and that it's not going to matter what's happening in your life, what your money situation is, what your relationships are like, what your use of your mind is like, that none of those things matter, this is a preposterous notion. And you can get fooled into this by listening to a bunch of spiritual teachings and especially like Buddhist teaching, stuff like that, they will fool you with some of these ideals. Then you'll go chasing these ideals, and very funnily enough, counterintuitively enough, by chasing these sorts of ideals, you're going to make yourself very miserable. So very practically, I want you to consider that setting up your life conditions and situations is crucial for your happiness. But even more importantly than that, living properly, that's the key to happiness, proper living. It's how you conduct your life. It's your entire attitude towards your life and what you're doing with your life, which is going to really determine whether you have a happy life or not. So then the question becomes, well, what's the proper way to live? And these days with postmodernism and sort of relativism going around, you could get sort of hoodwinked into buying this idea that, well, Leo, isn't it all relative? What's the proper way to live? Who gets to say that? Isn't that a subjective thing? It is and it isn't. So what we have to recognize is that there is definitely a right and a wrong way to live. It's not all relative. If you live in the wrong ways, you will be miserable. And then if you live in the right ways, then you're not going to be guaranteed happiness, but you're going to create the best circumstances for happiness. You're going to create the optimal conditions. And that's the best you can really do. So in this sense, conservatives are actually correct and liberals are wrong, that you can just live any which way you want. Conservatives usually like to stress that there's one proper way to live. And if you're not living this one proper way, then this is going to lead to chaos and misery and a bad society, and all sorts of evil will happen. They're not wrong about that. However, it's more nuanced than that. That's a half-truth. The conservatives have a half-truth there. When I say that there's a right way to live, this is a much broader notion than what conservatives can fathom. For a conservative mind, the right way to live is just the way that their culture has indoctrinated them, their culture, their traditions, their religion, their philosophy, and that's the only way to live. Of course, that's wrong. There's many different, very wildly different right ways to live. And in this sense, the liberals are right. Because what the liberals stress is that, your right way to live is just like your religion. That doesn't mean that I have to follow your religion. It doesn't mean it's going to work for me. And in fact, maybe your religion will make you happy, but it'll make me miserable. And there's different religions we can all, subscribe to. You pick your favorite one. Conservatives don't like this idea. Liberals love this idea. So in this sense, the liberals are right. But just because there's multiple different right ways to live doesn't mean that there's an infinite number of right ways to live and that there's no wrong ways to live that will make you miserable. There are more ways that you can live that will make you miserable than that will make you happy. It's a lot easier to make yourself miserable than to make yourself happy, of course. So think about that. Fundamentally, happiness comes from living virtuously, not from chasing pleasure. And here I have a nice quote from Aristotle, which says, quote, "Happiness is more often found with those who are highly cultivated in their minds and in their character, and only have a moderate share of external goods, than among those who possess external goods to a useless extent, but are deficient in higher qualities." End quote. There's a lot of conflation that happens in our culture between success and happiness, and we tend to assume that these are the same thing. They're not. There are a lot of ways that you can generate success in our culture that are unethical, immoral, even illegal, or just come from being an asshole, being ruthless, dominating other people, manipulating other people, lying, cheating, stealing, and in general, acting in bad character. But by acting this way, you can still make millions and billions of dollars. Is that going to make you happy? No. Likewise, you can achieve enormous fame or success through some sort of artistic pursuits, music, acting, celebrity, fame, that sort of stuff. And you would assume that, well, that will make me happy, right? No, because you can achieve all those things without having good character. In fact, our culture is so debased at this point that many, if not most, of the most successful celebrities, and especially what you see online with social media influencers, YouTubers, and so forth, the most successful YouTubers are usually horrible characters. These are not people with outstanding character who have developed their character, who have developed their minds and their psyches. These are people who are doing silly, stupid things, playing video games or whatever. They can make millions of dollars that way and become very famous and influential, but that doesn't mean that they're going to have happiness. And of course, most of them don't. And it's easy to get seduced by this. Especially these days, because these days I think happiness is more difficult, given that we live in a very artificial environment. If you were living like our ancestors out in the woods, farming, hunting, doing that kind of stuff, your environment would have natural forces that force you to live in the proper ways, because if you didn't live in the proper ways, you just die. So nature will force you to live in the proper ways that cultivate good character, work ethic, and other things like this, these kinds of virtues that will just automatically make you happy. But these days, we've domesticated ourselves so much, we're so out of touch with nature, and these natural forces are no longer there, that it's easy to put yourself in this artificial lifestyle where you're sitting at home on welfare checks, smoking weed, eating pizza, playing video games all day, trolling around on Reddit, and consuming fascist media while you're playing your video games, right? You can have a whole lifestyle of this. Doing drugs and jerking off to porn and stuff like that. Very easy to fall into that kind of trap these days. And there's not going to be those natural forces that force you to develop character and to live virtuously. This is exacerbated by capitalism because capitalism has an incentive to distort your idea of happiness. It's not in capitalism's best interest to help you find true happiness because capitalism wants you to always be seeking for the next thing so that they can sell you more fake solutions. So you're always dissatisfied and then you go and shop for more stuff. This is perfect from the point of view of capitalism. Now, of course, is some capitalist, bigwig elite, globalist sitting up at top, engineering ways to keep you unhappy forever? No, that's not what's really happening. It's not some conspiracy theory. It's just market forces are working this way, right? For example, you're not going to become very wealthy by advertising to the whole world how to become truly happy. But you can become very wealthy by advertising to the whole world some, get-rich-quick scheme or some rapid weight loss solution that, of course, doesn't work. And even if it did work, it still won't make you happy. So there's just not an emphasis in our culture and our society towards genuine happiness. The emphasis is on, how can some business serve you some quick little solution? Because what everybody wants is to buy some quick solution, not to actually work on developing a virtuous lifestyle and their character. And you can't run a big advertisement on the Super Bowl telling people that I'm going to help you to develop a great character. It's not going to pay for itself, this kind of advertisement. But if you're advertising, chocolate-covered bacon, maybe you could earn $1 billion from that. True happiness cannot be purchased because it is the result of a well-conditioned mind and lifestyle that takes years to cultivate. See, true happiness is also not one of these quick little solutions. It's not like something you can generate or do in a weekend or even in a year. You have to build your life around it from birth. And a lot of people have been neglectful doing this in the first 20, 30 years of their life. They've just been neglectful because they've been so distracted by, nonsense, doing nonsense, following all their friends and just kind of going along with the flow of culture that, they get into their 30s and 40s and then it's a lot harder to start there because you should have been starting in elementary school working on this stuff. But, it's better to start late than never. So don't quit just because you're in your 30s and 40s. You can still do it. What's necessary is for you to conduct a personal investigation of the nature of happiness, both in general and also specifically about what makes you happy. Now, this is a key that a lot of books and teachers about happiness won't tell you. A lot of spiritual people won't tell you this, spiritual gurus. They can give you general platitudes about what'll make you happy or not. They'll tell you to meditate or whatever, just in general. But that's not specific enough. You need to find what makes you specifically happy. Now, I'm going to share with you some of these general principles like any spiritual teacher can about happiness. But in the end, only you can find what makes you personally happy. So here's two things you got to really start to contemplate as part of your philosophical pursuits. Question number one is, what is happiness in general for all humans? And then question number two is, what specifically makes me happy? And so your life is going to be a hybrid of both of these. One by itself is not going to be enough. And you have to be very careful not to just speculate and theorize or read books about happiness. You should read some books about happiness and learn some theory, but more importantly, you need to actually observe how happiness functions in your own life. What makes you happy and what doesn't? This is an observation exercise. I have an old episode in the past called Learning Equals Observation. Go rewatch that to understand the importance of observation here. There's a difference between observing happiness in your own life versus just speculating about what'll make you happy. These are two different things. And this observation process is not merely about reaching some theoretical answers that someone like me could give you. The process of observing and inquiring into the nature of happiness itself will grow and mature you in the necessary ways. It will be part of the exercise of building your character and living virtuously. A person who never questions what is happiness and how to live a happy life, this kind of person is already making a big mistake. Just like with solving math problems, it does no good for me to tell you what the math solutions are. You got to go through the labor of solving the math problems to learn mathematics. Likewise with happiness. The observation process will teach you much better than anything that I could ever say. By deriving the answers, that itself will reshape your mind and change your priorities and change your desires and change your value system. And from that is where your happiness will ultimately come. Without doing that, your behavior won't change. You'll have your old behaviors, then you'll have your sort of ideals that you learn, let's say from me or some other spiritual guru. You learn some sort of ideals about what you should be doing, but then you won't be able to motivate yourself to actually do the things you should be doing to be happy. Because that requires retraining of your priorities. The issue is that you do many things which make you unhappy, but you can't stop doing them, can you? How do you solve that? By a process of long-term self-observation that will start to change. Remember, I have an older episode called Awareness Alone is Curative. That's where this comes into play here. By observing yourself being miserable through your old value system and your old behaviors, you'll eventually develop the motivation and leverage you need to change those things. Because changing those habits isn't easy, especially if you've got, decades of bad habits that you've trained up. The things you think will make you happy may not make you happy. This requires empirical testing. And you have to be very honest with yourself about what makes you truly happy. Because what could happen is that you invest a lot of your time and energy and resources into something you think will make you happy, but then it doesn't make you happy, but then you're not admitting it to yourself, you're in denial about it, simply because you've invested so much, it would be too painful to admit that you've made this very bad investment. This is sort of the sunk cost fallacy as it's known. You have to distinguish between the idea of doing a thing versus how it actually makes you feel. You can fall in love with the idea of something, and that would be a big trap. An example of this from my own life was when I was younger, when I was in my teenage years, I really fell in love with the idea of working at a AAA game development studio, working on a big budget, game, the biggest possible game, like a Halo type of game. And then when I actually started developing my own games, and then when I actually got hired by a big studio, what I realized is that working in a big studio environment is not enjoyable. I was having more enjoyment working on my own indie games before I got hired to work at one of these AAA studios. And I was in denial about that for a while because I worked so hard to get into one of these prestigious studios that then it felt like, something must be wrong with me because I'm not happy here. What am I doing wrong? And then ultimately what I realized is it's not that I was doing anything wrong. It's just like it's a very toxic, the AAA game studio whole system and environment is extremely toxic. They overwork their employees. Most people get burned out. You don't really get paid and compensated fairly for the amount of hours you work. And it's not as enjoyable as working on your own indie games. At least that was what I discovered for myself. That was a painful process to go through that, because I was so in love with the idea of working for a AAA game studio. Just one example. Another example is, some guru or some people might tell you that meditation should make you happy. And then you're meditating for years, but it doesn't make you happy. So what are you going to do then? See? You might think there's something wrong with you. But maybe it's just that the way your mind is wired, meditation is never going to make you happy. Maybe meditation is not right for you. You see? This is where it gets to customizing things to your specific lifestyle, to your situation. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is to listen to some Buddhist or spiritual teacher about what'll make you happy and then just blindly follow it. That's not going to fly. Some people are literally the happiest sitting alone in a cave for years meditating. For some people, that's their ideal, happiest lifestyle. But for most people, that's not going to make them happy. In fact, that's going to make them miserable. You have to discover what kind of person you are. What makes you happy depends on a couple of key things. Your personality type and your genetic temperament. This is huge, 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 huge. People have vastly different personality types and genetic temperaments, talents and skills and strengths. You have to take this into account. The second important point is your level of development and maturity. This is also huge, and this is a point that doesn't really get discussed a lot because most people don't even think of human beings in terms of levels of development, as we discussed with spiral dynamics, all those models of psychological development that I've shared with you in the past. Those are super important and come into play here. Depending upon whether your spiral dynamic stage, red, blue, orange, green, yellow, or beyond, whatever stage you're at, go check out my spiral dynamic series for more on that. Find out roughly where you are. You're going to need to find ways to be happy at your level. And a lot of times what happens is that the spiritual people that you listen to, your gurus, they're at a very different level of development and maturity than you. You might be 20 years old, 30 years old. Your guru might be 60 years old and at a much more evolved level of development. And then he's just giving you, advice from his vantage point, but that's not where you're at developmentally or in terms of your maturity. Super important to consider. And then, of course, your guru will have a different personality type than you and very different genetic temperament and skills and talents and strengths and weaknesses than you as well. Both of these points are very underemphasized. And I think that this trips a lot of people up when it comes to creating a happy life. So here's some tips to help you specifically figure out what kind of happiness you need. Firstly, make sure that you take the Myers-Briggs personality test. You can find it online. Also, you can take the Big Five personality test, and you can also take the Enneagram personality test. And there's other personality tests. Feel free to search around and find whatever personality tests there are. But those are the three big ones that you should consider. These can be extremely helpful once you take them and you find your type. It can be extremely helpful in pinning down your strengths and weaknesses and your temperament, your core personality preferences, and what you need to make your specific personality type happy. So make sure you do that. Another thing you should do is make sure that you peg your level of ambition. This is one thing that these personality tests overlook, is that they don't consider the importance of ambition. And this is something, again, that almost nobody talks about. Ambition. Your spiritual guru is not going to tell you about ambition, which is actually huge in terms of whether spirituality is going to make you happy or not. Because part of your genetic temperament and personality is how ambitious you are. Some people are just born extremely ambitious. They want to conquer the whole world. They want a lot from life. And other people are a lot more modest about what they want out of life. And both these types of people need different types of lifestyles. You cannot take a super ambitious person and just sit him in a cave meditating and have him be happy. That's not going to fly. And that's, again, one of these things that these spiritual gurus don't tell you about. It's a lot easier to be, frankly, very spiritual without any ambitions. So you need to decide for yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how ambitious am I? Just naturally. Personally, I'm a very ambitious person. More ambitious than probably 90% of people on this planet. Ambitious people require a much more active lifestyle with more goals and more of the sort of materialistic seeking, you might say. And this is something that Buddhists will not teach you about. Another factor you should consider is how liberal versus how conservative are you. Go check out my two-part series called Understanding the Liberal Mind, Understanding the Conservative Mind, which tells you the difference between those two temperamentally. It's a temperamental difference. It's like a personality type almost. How much order and regimentation do you need in your life versus spontaneity? If you're conservative, you need a lot of order and regimentation. That's what makes you feel comfortable and safe and good. If you're a liberal, you need a lot of variety, adventure, experience, and spontaneity, and not so much regimentation. That's important to consider. Nobody really tells you about that. Other things you should consider: how artistic are you? If you're truly artistic, you can't live without making art. Some people are extremely artistic. They're miserable when they're not making art. Other people don't care about art at all. They don't have a single artistic bone in their body. Those are usually the sales types of guys. Maybe the political types and so forth. How much creativity and art do you need in your life? Think about that. Also think about, what is your level of risk tolerance? Some people have a very high level of risk tolerance. Therefore, they go and they need to do sort of adrenaline junkie type of stuff. They got to take big risks, whether it's in business or gambling or dangerous, adventurous sports, extreme sports, this kind of stuff. These are your risk takers. They make risky investments and so forth, and they actually get a thrill out of this. For other people, they hate that kind of thing. They want to be very safe and very conservative. They don't have a high risk tolerance. That stresses them out, and it makes them miserable. Consider how masculine or feminine are you. That plays a huge role. Consider how much variety do you need in your life. Consider how much socialization do you need. Consider how much human contact do you need. Consider how many friends do you need. Consider how much sex do you need. What kind of sex drive do you have? One of the things that you're not told by any spiritual guru is that people have wildly different sex drives. It's amazing. Some of my friends in the pickup community have crazy sex drives. Like they will have sex 4 times a day. Like when I think about that, that's crazy to me to have sex 4 times a day. They do that. I mean, people have very different hormone levels that determines your sex drive. And of course, your sex drive is going to vary depending on your age. So if you're in your early 20s and 30s, you have a very different sex drive than your guru who's in his 60s and has 0 testosterone. Also consider how much solitude do you need? Because if you need a lot of solitude and then you start having a bunch of children, you're going to be miserable. The children will not allow you any solitude. How much time do you need in nature? How much success do you need to be fulfilled? How much work and career do you need? How much impact do you want to have in the world? Is that important to you? How much of a leadership role do you need to be in? Some people are just natural born leaders. They need to be in a leadership role or they won't feel good. And other people are just sheep and followers and they have no interest in taking the responsibilities of a leadership role. And they would be miserable in a leadership position. You got to find out what's your situation. How much autonomy do you need in your life? Do you need people telling you what to do and bossing you around and setting rules for you because it sets a certain order because you can't set your own rules? Or do you want enough autonomy to do all that for yourself? But then you got to be responsible and discipline yourself. How much learning and intellectualism do you need? Some people are very intellectual, like me, and other people are not intellectual at all. I'm miserable when I'm not feeding my intellect. How much spirituality do you need? Spirituality is a funny one because in the past I used to believe that everyone needs spirituality, that spirituality is just going to automatically make everyone happy. But the more that I actually observe humans in the field, so to speak, the more I see how false that is. Most humans don't need spirituality because they're not very mature or developed. How much spirituality you need depends on how mature and developed you are. If you're very mature and developed, you can't live without spirituality. You'll be miserable. On the other hand, if you're very immature and undeveloped, spirituality will make you miserable. It's just a burden that you don't need. It's going to hold you back. Doing spirituality without being ripe will actually make you miserable and unhappy. So all this just goes to show that the key here is that you will not be happy without a deep knowing of yourself. And how do you come to know yourself? Through observing yourself, putting yourself into a lot of different experiences, amassing a lot of life experience, and seeing how you are reacting to it, how you're responding to it. That's the key. So if you're very young, if you're in your 20s or even younger, then it's going to be difficult for you to know yourself at this point just because you don't have enough life experience. So one of the things that I recommend for you to hasten this process of self-understanding and figuring out how to design your happy life is expose yourself to more experience. I have an episode in the past called something along the lines of expose yourself to massive experience. That's literally what I titled it. That's crucial for especially for you youngsters. Those of you who are older, you already have a lot of life experience. What you would benefit from is sitting down now and reflecting on your life experience, because it's not enough just to have it. You got to reflect on it and draw conclusions from it. If you're in your 40s, you got plenty of life experience that you need to go and process and reflect upon and draw some conclusions from. And of course, this will come naturally with experience and with age, which is why older people tend to be happier. They've actually done studies, and what they found is that people in their 50s and 60s generally tend to have a higher happiness level than those who are in their 20s. Why is that? Because generally speaking, these people have come to know themselves, and they generally understand what's going to make them happy or not, and they've stopped fighting with themselves. And they're now at peace with their own personality. They know who they are, and they put themselves into those situations which suit their personality. Whereas young people don't know any better. They're running around. They're trying to be cool. They're trying to fit in. They're trying to conform. And as a young person, you're doing a lot of stupid stuff you shouldn't be doing. That's not making you happy, but you're doing it just because everyone's doing it and you don't know any better. And you're sort of peer pressured into it. You're not thinking independently. Fundamentally, it's not possible to be happy when you're fighting with yourself. Think about how much time you spend fighting with yourself. You have one decision to do this, and you have another decision to do that. So you're at odds with yourself. Can't be happy that way. Here's some more general points about happiness before we get into specific examples and lists. Distinguish between pleasure versus satisfaction or contentment. See? Pleasure is on this side, let's say, and then satisfaction and contentment is over here. What you're looking for is not pleasure. You're looking for satisfaction and contentment. So what this tells you is that chasing raw pleasure will not make you truly happy. Great food, sex, luxury vacations, spas, relaxation retreats, video games, drugs, partying. This is mostly chasing dopamine hits, and it's chasing raw pleasure. It doesn't work. Your brain actually has two different neurochemical systems for pleasure versus satisfaction, contentment. There's the dopamine system and the serotonin system. The dopamine system is what your brain uses for short-term motivations to reward you with raw pleasure and short-term gains and benefits. For example, if you're walking down the street and you find a pack of $100 bills, $1,000 just laying there, and you find it, you're going to experience an immediate dopamine boost. And you're going to feel great for that whole day because you found $1,000. But then a week later, you're going to drop back to baseline. You're going to be no happier than you were before you found that $1,000. That's how dopamine works. That's why when you're playing video games, you play one video game, you get bored of it after a few days because there's nothing new there. Dopamine is about newness, finding new stimulating experiences. So you're done with one video game, then you got to jump to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. You don't even finish each video game. You just play it until you've sucked out all the newness of it, and then you just jump to the next one. And fundamentally, you're not satisfied. Same thing with drugs, and same thing a lot of times with sex. On the other hand, the serotonin system is a much more consistent, stable. You don't get as high peaks of pleasure with this system, but here you can get a long-lasting, stable sort of happiness, and that's what you want. And this is what you get by cultivating your character and living virtuously. It's a long-term game versus a short-term game. If you chase material achievements, rank, status, position, material objects, you're never going to be truly happy. Money, cars, houses, power, sex, fame, these kinds of things. Now, of course, there's an important caveat here, which is that you do need some basic level of these things. You need a basic degree of food, safety, shelter, sex, rest, money, a house to be happy. But that's just like the baseline. That's not sufficient to make you happy. That by itself won't make you happy, and chasing more and bigger amounts of it is not going to really do it for you. A bigger and bigger house is not going to be your way to happiness. More and more sex and just a massive variety of sex. You have sex with one girl and you think like, oh, well, that was great, but I'm still unsatisfied. So the solution is that I'm going to have now, instead of having sex with one, I'm going to have sex with two. And then I'm still unsatisfied with two. Then you're going to say, well, then I got to have sex with more. I'm going to have sex with 100 girls this year. That's not going to be a strategy for happiness. Make sure you make the distinction between success and happiness. These are not the same thing. Massive success is not equivalent to happiness. It's easy to fool those things, conflate them together. In fact, chasing massive success is a bad strategy for happiness, because a lot of the things you need to do to achieve massive success are precisely neglecting the development of your character and your mind. Because usually developing your character doesn't lead to massive success. In fact, it usually ends up being a limiting factor, because to become massively successful, you usually have to be pretty ruthless. The reason happiness is difficult is because it's not about what you buy, it's about who you are and how you live. You can be ultra successful, but if you don't live correctly, you will be utterly miserable. And that's why a lot of successful people end up killing themselves. Happiness requires cultivation, long-term cultivation. It's about growing your mind and yourself, which is much harder than acquiring material things. You can't buy this kind of cultivation. And you can't achieve it quickly. Happiness requires a serious attitude towards living. You can't just treat life flippantly. You have to be serious with yourself and recognize that if you don't take life seriously, you're not going to become happy. You can't just leave this up to chance. Happiness is not about chance or about being lucky and making it big in the world. Don't think of happiness as a short-term thing like, how good do I feel today? Am I feeling happy today? It doesn't really matter how you feel today. Think of happiness rather as a decades-long pursuit where every day, rather than asking yourself, how do I feel today, you're building towards a happy life by executing on the principles that you know make for the good life. This is a long-term investment project. The investment that you make every day into your own development, that itself is what generates meaning and makes you feel good about your life. Right? So it's the difference between jerking off to some porn and feeling good for 10 seconds versus investing your day into building something long-lasting in your life. The happy life is not about being in a peak state of pleasure. It's about having your life well put together, being well developed, being aligned with your highest values, taking action, doing meaningful things, and cultivating a spiritual connection. That's the key. As you do your observation work, notice how little happiness is produced by acquiring physical objects such as a car, a gun, a toy, a new electronic gadget, etc. For example, you might see some fancy watch in a magazine, and then you want that watch so badly. Finally, after a year, you buy that watch. You're so excited you finally get the watch. You bring it home from the store. You wear it around your house. You show it off to your family and to your friends. And for that day, you're thrilled and happy. But then the next day, you actually feel like you're disappointed with this watch. And then you can even get depressed. Observe that. Notice that. See, it's not enough for me to tell you that. I can tell you that, but that's not going to actually change anything in your mind. You have to actually go through that process. It's worth it for you to buy a $1,000 watch, go through that process just to learn the lesson that a $1,000 watch is not going to make you happy, fundamentally. Or a car. Or a luxury vacation to the Bahamas. As you mature and develop and grow up the spiral, less and less material things will make you happy. Money, success, sex, cars, houses, luxury boats, partying, vacations, jets. These will be less and less meaningful to you. The more important spirituality will become. Spirituality will supplant all these things. But right now, if you're young and immature and you haven't really evolved highly up the spiral, then don't go fooling yourself thinking that you're above these things. See, this is the mistake that happens if you get into spirituality too young and you're kind of like naive about it, is that the spiritual teacher will, of course, tell you that all these things like houses and cars and money and sex won't make you happy, and then you just listen to him. You don't do any of these things, but deep down you crave them, and you have that karma, you haven't really burned through it. Go check out my episode called Burning Through Karma, where I talk more about that. That's a hugely important episode. Go watch that. Also, you should distinguish between happiness and meaning. Or rather, between pleasure and meaning. Pleasure and meaning. Most people are chasing pleasure and they're not actually creating meaning in their life consciously. These are two different things. What you want more than pleasure is you want meaning, a meaningful life. A meaningful life generates a passive income of gradual happiness, stable, even-keeled happiness. Whereas pleasure is very much like a roller coaster, and you can't depend upon it. And also, you can't sustain it. You can't just be in pleasure, peak pleasure, like all the time. It doesn't work that way because your mind and brain just adapts to it chemically. But if you build a meaningful life over a period of decades, the residual passive income that you're going to be getting from that cultivating of that kind of life for meaning, that is going to produce a stable level of contentment using your serotonin system rather than your dopamine system. And that's going to be something sustainable and very rewarding. But then, of course, the question is, how do you create a meaningful life? And of course, that's different for different people. What's meaningful to you? What kind of life is most meaningful to you? If you want help figuring that out, that's what my Life Purpose course is about. Go check that out, where I take you through over 20 hours of hand-holding exercises where I take you step by step, try to figure out what kind of life is most meaningful to you. Ultimately, happiness is about living in a way that's aligned with your highest values. In the Life Purpose course, I help you to find your top 10 values. Do you know what your top values are? If you don't, then how are you going to create a happy life? People have very different values. Do you value truth more or love more? Do you value companionship? Do you value family? Do you value tradition? Do you value power? What do you value in life? Building a life of happiness requires maturing and evolving your priorities and desires, not merely acting them out. This is the mistake people make, is they just act out on their desires without thinking like a second meta level beyond that of like, well, these are my current level of desires, but these desires are not very high quality desires. How can I improve the quality of my desires? See, that would be a more strategic way to go about it. And then that would require development work. And then that's what burning through your karma is. Go see that episode, Burning Through Karma. That's how you do it. That's how you change your priorities, is that you consciously engage with your lower conscious desires. You observe the consequences of those, then you see that it's not making you happy. And then through that process, you can bootstrap yourself to a higher set of desires. Also, you should pay attention to manipulation. As you're pursuing happiness, you're going to manipulate your way into happiness. At least that's going to be your sort of default strategy. You're going to try to manipulate, and you're going to think that, well, if I manipulate it, it makes me a little bit happy. Then if I manipulate more, it's going to make me even more happy. And then you get into this cycle of manipulation. But what you'll realize is that the more you try to manipulate reality, the more you'll fail to manipulate reality. In the end, you can't manipulate reality at 100%. It doesn't work that way. Even though that's what the ego wants, it's never going to succeed in that. And so every time you try to manipulate reality and you fail, that makes you miserable. Notice that. No, you have to, in your own mind, link manipulation to the misery it creates for you. See? So being highly manipulative turns out to be a counterintuitive and bad strategy for becoming happy. All right, now let's get into some of these lists. This is where it's really practical. Here's a list of the general things that will make you unhappy. Here we go. Number 1, pursuing short-term goals which don't build long-term capital in your life. Things that you do just for a temporary enjoyment, and then you have nothing remaining after that experience is done. For example, you might go to a comedy show. You watch the comedy show. It's hilarious. It's funny for 1 hour. You come out there. You're happy, but then what do you have from that a week from now? You've got nothing. Nothing remains but just a memory from that comedy show, right? You haven't invested anything into building a meaningful life just by watching one comedy show. On the other hand, look at this. Look how we can transform this into something meaningful. For example, let's say I want to be a stand-up comedian. Now, if I go to a comedy show, I'm not just watching that comedy show just to get some laughs. There's an additional meta goal, which is fitting into the larger scheme of my life, and my whole purpose in life is like, I want to become the best comedian in the world. Now, every comedy show that I go to and watch, see, I'm not just laughing, I'm also training my mind as to what comedy is. I'm making notes, I'm stealing ideas, and this is inspiring me to wake up tomorrow and to work on my own comedy special, let's say. And I do that for years until I become a great comedian. And that process is actually building long-term capital and meaning into my life, you see. Very different. Very different. Likewise with playing video games. You can play a video game in a way where it's just like you're playing a video game and then you're done with it a week from now and nothing remains but just some memories. Or you could play that video game, for example, the way that I play video games is I will analyze the video game, its design, its structure, because in my mind, it's like, well, I want to create my own video game and I'm just using this as fodder for a longer term goal. You know, if you want to be a game developer, for example, the way that I wanted to when I was younger. Continuing on the list, things that will make you unhappy, generally speaking. Chasing pleasure, chasing dopamine hits like gambling, jerking off, sex, video games, drugs, junk food, any kind of mindless, compulsive consumption of any product. Chasing material objects, chasing fame as a substitute for love. Approval seeking and trying to be cool and to fit in. Notice that fitting in and being cool doesn't make you happy. Being foolish, naive, and reckless is a sure way to make yourself unhappy in life. Not being aligned with your top values, that's huge. If your top value is truth and hard work, let's say, and family, but you're forced to lie for a living, you're lazy, you don't work very hard, you don't have much of a work ethic, and you don't have a family, you're going to be miserable in life. I mean, it's just obvious. The next item is lying, cheating, theft, deception, exploitation, fraud, and criminality. All these things will make you very unhappy. Being forced to do immoral things if you're in that kind of position. Like if your boss forces you to do immoral things at work, this will make you unhappy. Hurting others, hurting animals, bullying others, being an asshole, and being a monster will generally make you unhappy. War and living in a violent or chaotic environment will make you unhappy. It's hard to be happy in a war zone. Trying to control others, trying to dominate and manipulate others. The controlling of other people is a horrible strategy for happiness. Being bullied or being teased will make you unhappy. Being disrespectful to others and also being disrespected. Being broke or stressing over money. Wasting your time and wasting your life will make you unhappy. Fundamentally. Doing work you find meaningless will make you unhappy. If you think that the most meaningful thing in the world is to save the environment, but then actually what you do for a living 8 hours a day, 5 days a week is you work at McDonald's flipping burgers, and you find that completely meaningless, and it has nothing to do with your high goal of, saving the environment, you're going to be miserable. You have to find work that you find meaningful. Being overworked, overstressed, and overly busy, filling your schedule with too many things, will surely make you unhappy. Trying to create success on a shaky foundation through cheating, fraud, and shortcuts, get-rich-quick schemes, this will make you unhappy. Because it'll all come crashing down. These houses of cards that you build, in general, any kind of house of cards you build, whether philosophically, ideologically, through religion, through some sort of, shortcuts in a get-rich-quick scheme, some investment scheme. All of this will make you unhappy. Desperation and neediness will make you unhappy. Slacking off, not working, being lazy, being in a rut, being a slob, getting too comfortable will make you unhappy. Avoidance of work and responsibility, doing work poorly as opposed to with excellence will make you unhappy. Procrastination and not taking action, stalling on making decisions. This is huge. This will make you miserable. Stagnation, doing the same thing over and over and over again for years, not changing things up when you know you need to change things up. For example, being stuck in some relationship that is going nowhere, some romantic relationship that's, it's not going anywhere, but you're just stuck in it and you're just kind of like tolerating it year after year after year, wasting time, this kind of thing. Or likewise, stagnating at some dead-end job, just, flipping burgers at McDonald's and just doing that year after year after year after year. There's nothing wrong flipping burgers at McDonald's as long as it's a step towards some larger thing you're working towards. That's fine. It's okay to work menial jobs, low-paid jobs. You got to start somewhere. That's fine. The problem is that when you turn this into sort of a whole lifestyle and then you give up on your ambitions, there's nothing else you're after in life, and then you just kind of like consign yourself to this kind of meek existence, this kind of like mediocrity. At least if you're ambitious. Now, if you're not a very ambitious person, maybe you're happy just flipping burgers at McDonald's. I don't know. You got to decide that for yourself. Personally, for me, that's hell. That's my personal hell, is working a menial job that contributes nothing towards higher things that I care about in life. To me, that's a waste of my life. Not taking care of your chores and having a dirty house. Being highly disorganized. This will make you unhappy. Gluttony will make you unhappy. Bad health. One of the surest ways to be miserable in life is to suffer from chronic health problems. I can tell you this from personal experience. There is no amount of meditation or psychedelics or spiritual mumbo jumbo or money or sex that will compensate for a lack of good health. And health is not something that you're always in control of. Sometimes you are. Of course, you can optimize your diet, exercise, things like this, but a lot of health is just genetics. And you gotta deal with the genetics you've been given. You can't really change your genetics. So for some people, life is unfair. For some people, they're just born with terrible health. For other people, they can eat garbage and their health is still fine. Donald Trump comes to mind, for example. That's just one of those factors you got to live with. You got to work around that. If you have health problems, chronic health problems, you got to find ways to be happy despite those and kind of like weaving in between. That's what I've been doing in my life over the last few years. It's definitely harder. It's not the case that everyone is on the same playing field and it's equally easy for everybody to be happy. Not at all. Some people are born into horrible war zone situations where it's a lot harder to be happy and they can't get out. They don't have an exit visa from that country or whatever. Some people are born to crippling poverty and that makes it a lot harder. Some people are born with terrible health and that makes it harder. And so on. The other general thing that will make you unhappy is feeling helpless and powerless. Being unable to control yourself, being out of control with your emotions, developing a victim mindset. Addiction will make you unhappy. Porn, sex, drugs, alcohol, weed, food, whatever your thing is. Doing things compulsively will make you unhappy. Being enslaved to someone else will make you unhappy. A lack of freedom and autonomy. When there's things you want to do, but other people are preventing you from doing them, like your family. Let's say you have an authoritarian father who prevents you from doing anything you really want to do. This will make you miserable. You need to get out from under that. This idea that you can just be happy unconditionally. You have some asshole authoritarian father who, dictates your whole life, doesn't let you do anything that you really want to do. and that you're just supposed to sit there and meditate and be happy about it, this is ridiculous. You need to change that situation. In fact, just by not taking action to change that situation, just by tolerating, that itself will double your misery. See? If you're in a toxic family situation, let's say, and this is a surefire recipe for unhappiness, what you got to ultimately do is leave and extract yourself from this toxic family situation. Now, what's interesting about it is you might think, well, but Leo, I can't leave right now. It's going to take me 4 years to get out of my toxic family situation because I got to find a job, I got to graduate high school and other things like this, right? The interesting thing is that it's not being completely out of your toxic family situation that is ultimately going to make you happy. What'll make you happy is the process that you undertake towards cultivating your lifestyle to break yourself free from that family. So to be happy in a toxic family situation, it's not that you have to wait 4 years to leave to be finally happy. It's that you have to start taking action tomorrow to prepare yourself to leave. If you start doing that tomorrow, you're already going to start to feel a lot happier about your situation, because a lot of what makes you feel unhappy is just the hopelessness and the sort of despair and depression that comes with knowing that your situation is never going to improve or change. That's what truly makes you unhappy, more than the, precise toxic situation that you're in. If you have hope, if you're working every day towards improving your situation, getting out of it, then you'll be able to tolerate 4 years of a little bit of toxicity here and there. You'll survive that. What you won't survive is this idea that it's hopeless and that you're going to now become a victim and you're not going to do anything to change it, and now your whole life is just going to be you being stuck there forever. Now that is a situation where it gets dangerous. In that kind of situation, you might want to, kill yourself. That's dangerous. Hope, a lack of hope is what gets people to kill themselves. It's just that simple. The next thing generally that will make you unhappy is joining a cult, getting roped into some kind of cult. Because cults are enslaving, they control you, they manipulate you, and in general, it's going to be very toxic. Also, conflict and fighting with people. Nothing will make you more unhappy than constant conflict with somebody, especially somebody close to you in an intimate relationship or with your family. You have to be able to find peace with people close to you, or you have to leave. It's that simple. You can either be at peace with people, find a way to communicate and cooperate, or you leave. Even if it's your closest family. Even if it's your children. Next is abusive relationships. Verbal abuse, emotional abuse, physical abuse. This has to change. You can't just tolerate abusive relationships and meditate your way through an abusive relationship. This is preposterous. Next is hanging out with negative, abusive, unconscious, and immature friends or people. Make sure your friends are not bringing you down with their depression and negativity. Next is not setting boundaries with people, being a people pleaser or a doormat. This is a surefire way to be miserable. This is a kind of a pattern. A lot of women suffer from this pattern in their relationships. Is this kind of like naive selflessness, this idea that you're going to sacrifice yourself for the world or for others. It's not going to work. You need to be appropriately selfish. This kind of idiot compassion, where you're just compassionate for everybody, it's going to make you unhappy. Being inauthentic, fundamentally, being inauthentic will make you very, very unhappy in life. You need to become authentically you. That's the whole key here. Find your authentic self and then play it out to the hilt. Stop sacrificing your authentic self for the sake of others in the name of selflessness or compassion or whatever. You're not doing the world any good by being inauthentic. Stop it. Trying to change people who don't want to change. This is hell. Don't try to self-actualize your friends and your family who are not ready for it. Don't try to awaken and enlighten your family, your toxic family. It's not going to work. They have to want to change. Untruthfulness, falsehood, and self-deception versus truthfulness. This will make you unhappy. Ignorance and lack of education will make you unhappy. Dogma and ideology. These always lead to unhappiness. There's no happiness with ideology and dogma, whether it's religious, political, scientific. Religious indoctrination will make you unhappy. Conformity and not thinking for yourself will make you unhappy. Bad forms of philosophy, such as nihilism, postmodernism, religion, cynicism, twisted versions of solipsism that some of you guys think that I am teaching you, this will make you unhappy. Mental illness, bipolar disorder, borderline personality disorder, schizophrenia, multiple personality disorder, these things. It's going to be quite challenging for you to be happy if you have a mental disorder. That's just the reality of it. You need to find a way to manage it. Otherwise, you're going to be miserable your whole life. So seek out therapy, seek out books, seek out counseling, seek out support group sessions, that kind of stuff. Educate yourself and really get a handle, understand your mental illness, and develop some sort of like coping strategies, whether it's maybe you need medication or maybe you need some sort of, therapeutic strategies or whatever, some Sedona method, whatever might help you. I don't know. In general, high emotional volatility and drama will make it impossible for you to be happy. Because fundamentally, what you need for happiness is you need peace. You can't have peace with this drama that you're constructing all the time. So pay attention to the drama you create and to the drama that you in general allow in your life. Remember, setting boundaries. If people are bringing drama into your life and you're going to tell me, Leo, I don't create the drama, it's my girlfriend or my wife or my children that are creating the drama, but you're still responsible for for having these weak boundaries that allow this drama to come into your life. Don't tolerate dramatic people. Judgment, criticism, and blame make it impossible for you to be happy. How can you be happy if you're criticizing everything all the time? This is one of my biggest issues, for example, with progressives. Progressives are always dissatisfied with everything that's happening in the political environment. No matter what wins they get, a Democrat might get elected president, the Democrats might pass some legislation and all this kind of stuff, and the progressives will never be satisfied with any of it. This will go on for the rest of your life as a progressive. As a socialist, you're never going to be satisfied. And so you're never going to be happy. I mean, it's just that simple. Think about it. Is that an intelligent way to go about life? Now, of course, you're going to say but Leo, I'm such a noble progressive. I'm fighting for such a good cause that I would rather be miserable my whole life than just to accept, those corporatist Democrats or something. Okay, well, then you're going to be miserable. Perfectionism. I suffer from perfectionism a lot. I'm very perfectionistic. I can tell you firsthand, it's made me very miserable. Arguing, debating, and trolling. All this online, toxic social media, online stuff, tweeting at people on Twitter or on Reddit, leaving nasty YouTube comments or going to the forum and saying something nasty on the forum, arguing with somebody. This you can't be happy under this. Hatred, anger, intolerance, and bigotry will make you unhappy. Narcissism, arrogance, and ego will make you unhappy. Emotional immaturity. This is why you want to mature yourself as quickly as possible and develop emotional intelligence. Lack of emotional intelligence will make you very unhappy. Regret, guilt, shame, and self-hatred will make you unhappy. Lack of love. Fear, insecurity, anxiety, and paranoia. You got to get a handle on your fears and insecurities. Lack of socialization, lack of social skills. Inability to get laid will make you miserable. Loneliness. taking on too much responsibility. You got to know how much responsibility you're capable of handling at any given point in your life. This will vary depending on how strongly you develop yourself, how good your health is, how good your mental strength is, your mental resilience. These things can be developed as well. But, if you have a low mental resilience and you can barely manage your own life, you cannot take on a lot of responsibility and be in some kind of leadership role until you get a handle on that and fix it. And then you can take on more responsibility. Living life too strictly and in too regimented a way makes it hard to be happy. Indecisiveness and failure to take action. Self-doubt. Self-doubt can make you very unhappy. Not changing a bad or wrong situation. Sometimes you clearly know that a situation that you're in is wrong and it's bad and it needs to be changed. But you don't want to pay the cost. It's a pain in the ass. It's inconvenient. You don't want to go through the changing the situation. And so you just tolerate it. And this makes you more and more miserable. It drips away on your mind. Sweeping things under the rug and running away from things and avoiding challenge. This makes you feel weak over time. It erodes your self-esteem and your self-efficacy. And in the worst case scenario, it turns into something called learned helplessness. And then you're miserable. Not taking care of your hygiene will make you unhappy. Hating your physical appearance. You have to come to a point of acceptance with your physical appearance, even if you're not the most beautiful or handsome person. Otherwise, you're never going to be happy. That's a whole separate topic. I might have a whole episode just on how to accept your physical appearance. That's challenging. Obligations that you don't believe in will make you unhappy. The process of divorce will make you unhappy. Also, marriage can make you very unhappy, but marriage can also make you happy. So that one, it very much depends on the quality of your marriage. But if you're going to have a miserable marriage that you don't invest into and you don't work on and you don't have good communication and you marry the wrong person, this is a recipe for misery. Foolish speculative investments that lose all your money will make you unhappy. Some latest crypto craze that you jump on, that'll make you unhappy. Here's an interesting one. Chronic loud noises and acoustic chaos. I have a personal example of this, actually. A couple of years ago, before I moved into my current house, I lived in an apartment, and I lived in that apartment for like 10 years. It was a great apartment, peaceful, quiet, amazing. And then in the final 6 months before I moved out of there, a new neighbor moved in. I lived downstairs, they moved in upstairs over me. And they had a little kid that was like 3 years old. And this little kid, he had so much energy, he was jumping up and down on the walls, on the ceiling, everything. My whole ceiling was vibrating, and I was having like noises, loud banging noises, randomly throughout the day, every day, for 6 months straight. I nearly lost my fucking mind. And it was very interesting because at that point I was doing a lot of deep meditation work, even more than I'm doing now. I was doing meditation retreats at home and other stuff like that. And I was under this kind of like illusion, sort of the Buddhist illusion that, I should be invincible to this kind of thing. I should be able to just meditate my way through it. And I was almost to the point where I was gaslighting myself, because I was almost saying to myself, well, but Leo, you're this spiritual teacher and you're this like master of psychology and stuff. Like, surely some little kid jumping up and down on your ceiling shouldn't piss you off this much and shouldn't cause you so much misery, So, what's wrong with you? You're not developed enough or something like that, right? I took it kind of like personally like that. And I talked with the neighbors a lot. The problem is, I talked to them. You might say, well, Leo, why didn't you just tell them to stop? I did many times. It got so bad, we went to management in the apartment, and I complained to them, and still, like, nothing changed. They couldn't control their kid. The bottom line was that either they had to move out or I had to move out. Ultimately, I literally moved out. I was so miserable at one point after like 6 months of this, I was sleeping in my car. That's how miserable I was because it was driving me insane. But then what was funny is that then later, after I moved out, I read an article online somewhere, like on CNN, I read an article, and some researcher somewhere did like an analysis of loud noises and how it affects the human brain and psyche. And what they found is that random loud noises that you can't predict, that just kind of like startle your nervous system, that this is something that you cannot actually acclimate to. Your nervous system will never acclimate to this. So it's not a matter of meditating more and just kind of calming yourself down. You can do a little bit of that, if it's just going to last a day, yeah. But if you're living in an environment where you are having random loud noises that startle your whole nervous system for months, for years, this will drive you crazy, and you're not wrong for being unhappy in that situation. Your nervous system is never going to adjust to that. So just so you know. It was to the point where I was walking around 24/7 with earplugs in my ears, from shooting handguns, those kind of earplugs. They were like 25 decibel earplugs, and I would wear those, and then I would wear literally headphones for, that you wear at the shooting range. I would have a double set of these earplugs and headphones, and the noises were still coming through. That's how bad it got. So just keep that in mind. This just goes to show you that this idea of unconditional, this sort of Buddhist unconditional happiness, you're not going to have this. This is a fantasy. You're not going to have this. Next, promising things to people that you can't deliver. This will make you unhappy. Next is doing impossible things. This is an interesting one. It is possible to sort of like set yourself up in life to take on some sort of project or activity that is just simply impossible. But you think it's possible, so you just keep doing it and doing it and doing it and failing and failing and failing. You just keep doing it, but it's impossible what you're trying to do. That's a recipe for failure. You have to recognize that some things are impossible. Now, of course, in practice, it's hard to tell what's possible, what's impossible, but, sometimes reality will defeat you and you have to accept that. Not every plan you have is going to work out. A lot of times you have plans, dreams, and ideas that are simply unfeasible. And like for example, with, if you're a socialist and you want America to become socialist, that's not going to happen. I got news for you. That's not going to happen in the next 100 years. America's not going to become socialist. What you want is impossible, basically. Now, you might argue with me and say, no, Leo, America can become socialist and it should become socialist, and I will fight for it to become socialist. Okay, fine. You keep doing that, but I'm telling you that you're going to be dead before America becomes socialist. So, you do what you want to do. If you want to die on the hill of idealism, go for it. But on the other hand, if you want to be a little bit wiser about it, you might recognize that maybe what I'm asking for of my government is such a high level of development that our government is not capable of that in the next 100 years. And then I'm the unrealistic one for asking that, for demanding that. You can have unrealistic demands of reality, and you have to be wise enough to realize when you are that way and then drop them. Another way to get caught in this trap of doing impossible things is sometimes you do two things that are just contradictory with each other. You try to have your cake and eat it too at the same time, and it just doesn't work. Like maybe you're trying to launch a business on the one hand and pursue meditation and enlightenment on the other hand, and these two things, it's just impossible to do both of them, because realistically, when you're starting a business, you're going to be working full-time, extra time, double time, 80 hours a week just to get your business to be successful in the next few years. And then realistically, to attain enlightenment, you're going to have to be meditating all that much time as well. You just don't have enough time in the day to do both. So you got to pick your priorities. It doesn't mean you can't do both in your life, but you got to schedule them properly. Maybe spend 5 years building your business. Then once that's established, then you can go do the enlightenment thing, or vice versa. You can do it in any order you want, but you have to be realistic. You only have so much time. You have limited resources. You have limited energy, right? Low spiral development will make you unhappy, generally speaking. Being petty and small-minded will make you unhappy. Being selfish, of course, is the ultimate way to make yourself unhappy. Although there's room for selfishness. So again, that kind of naive selflessness where you sacrifice yourself for the whole world, that will also make you unhappy. So you got to find a balance between selfishness and selflessness. But being extremely selfish, that's sort of like Donald Trump narcissistic selfishness, that will make you unhappy. In general, the misuse of your mind, improper use of your mind will make you unhappy. Trying to escape all suffering, interestingly enough, will make you unhappy because every time you're going to fail, and every time you fail, that's just you're going to, feel bad about yourself, and it's just going to double down on your unhappiness. And lastly, excessive spiritual seeking or trying to escape the material domain will make you very unhappy. So be careful with that one. I fall into that trap myself. Okay, now here's a list of general things that will make you happy. Anything aligned with your top values. Putting your talents and strengths to use. Being useful and productive. Things that make you feel strong and powerful. Developing new skills, and just the process of training yourself in something meaningful. Whether it's playing the guitar, if that's meaningful to you, or getting better at your golf swing, or getting better at mathematics or writing, or any kind of training. Anything that makes your mind stronger. Self-education if you're an intellectual type of person. Learning, reading, studying, contemplating. Doing sports if you're a physically talented person. Doing art if you're artistic. Being creative if you're a very creative person. Doing excellent work. See, there's a difference between just work and excellent work. I'll have a video about this in the future. A lot of people do work, but they don't do excellent work. And there's a certain joy that comes from not just doing work, but doing excellent work. These are two different things. Notice that. Notice the joy you get out of excellence. Doing innovative and impactful work. Big projects, if you're very ambitious, then big projects will make you happy. Being your own boss can make you very happy if you're entrepreneurial and very independent-minded, for example, the way that I am. I am so miserable working for a boss, and I'm so happy working for myself. That's one of the lifestyle changes that I made early on in my life that was crucial to my current level of happiness. That's paid dividends for me for decades, being my own boss. But it's also challenging, and it's also not for everybody. I don't think everybody is cut out to be his or her own boss. But if you're the kind of person that needs that, then you need that. And you need to create that. And it's not enough for you to just meditate your way out of that. Being in a leadership position can make you very happy if you want to be in that kind of position. It's extremely rewarding to be a good leader. Very, very meaningful and rewarding. Helping others and contributing to the improvement of society. Proper time to rest and relax and to de-stress. This is crucial for happiness. You can't be happy by being stressed and overworked all the time. Human intimacy, companionship, and friendship. This will create some serious happiness for you. Deep conversations. Building your own family. That can be extremely rewarding and meaningful for those of you who want it. On the other hand, if you don't want to do that, if you're not a family, kid-friendly type of person, don't do it. For example, for me, I don't really want to build my own family. I have other priorities. I can take that. I want to put that time into other things that I'm doing in my life, into my spiritual work, into my life purpose. But for most people, that's not the right choice. For me, that's the right choice. For you, building your own family might be the thing that makes you super happy. Socialization, if you're a social kind of person. Charity, giving gifts, and being nice to people. It's one of the easiest ways to make yourself happy is just be nicer to people. Be more charitable to people. Setting boundaries with people will make you a lot happier. Your top 2 love languages. You've heard of this concept, the 5 love languages. If you haven't, search it. Probably most of you have. I think most people know about it these days in the pop culture. But yeah, find out what your top 2 love languages are. For me, it's physical touch and quality time. That's what you need to be happy in your intimate relationships. So get that. Ask for it. Literally ask for it from your partner. It's funny. One time I asked a girl, usually when I start dating a new girl, I ask her, what are her top 2 love languages? I asked one girl, what are your top 2? And she said, all of them. And I said, don't be greedy. I'm only giving you 2. The next point is lots of time alone. If you're an introverted person, you're going to be miserable if you're surrounded by people all the time. You need time alone. That's very true for me, for example. Anything that puts you into a flow state is your key to happiness. For example, for me, driving puts me into a flow state. I love driving. Just being on an empty road in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, not even going anywhere specific. I can just go drive out in the middle of the desert for 100 miles in the middle of the night, and I'll be so happy just because I'm in a flow state. Listen to some good music. Whatever that is for you. Being on the edge, facing difficult things and meeting challenges, kind of like flexing your muscle and being powerful in life, exercising your power, as opposed to being a victim. This makes you happy. Making the most out of your day and your life. This makes you happy. Making long-term investments in your life makes you happy. Confidence and developing it through work and experience makes you happy. If you're insecure all the time, the antidote to that is confidence. Now you wonder, well, Leo, how do I develop that confidence? What's the magic trick? There is no magic trick. The way you do it is by exposing yourself to massive experience in whatever field you're insecure in. For example, if you're insecure talking to beautiful women as a guy, the way you change that and become confident is by doing it a lot and becoming experienced to the point where all your insecurity melts away, and then you're confident, and then you're happy. If you're insecure doing public speaking, what you do is you slowly expose yourself to more and more public speaking until you are no longer insecure about speaking in public. And this applies to absolutely everything that you're insecure about. The next point is exploring life and having new experiences, and travel makes you happy. Now, you have to be careful here because sometimes people treat travel as just like an escape. You travel, especially to on luxury vacations, you just travel endlessly. And this becomes a sort of a hedonistic pleasure seeking. But there's a different kind of travel where you travel for the enriching experience and you really soak in the experience. It doesn't have to be some luxury fancy hotel that you stay at. But you're treating travel as a way of kind of like broadening your horizons and expanding your consciousness and contemplating life. That can be very rewarding and give you lots of happiness. But you have to be careful not to just turn that into an escape. Because if you need to be traveling all the time to be happy, well, that's not a very good strategy. Because most of the time, you're not going to be traveling. Most of the time, you're going to be spending at home, realistically. On the other hand, is it possible to set up a lifestyle where you're traveling all the time if that's what you want? Yeah, that's possible. There are jobs you can take that force you to travel, every week, all year, around the world. There are jobs like that. If you love to travel all the time and you need that much variety in your life and you just can't, stand sitting at home, change your job to that kind of job. Patiently cultivating a hobby. Don't underestimate the power of that. Pick one hobby, one or two hobbies that you have that you patiently invest into. The point here is that it's patient and it's gradual, and you're investing into it over years and decades, and you're building some kind of mastery and expertise in this hobby. And it gives you a lot of joy just doing it, whether it's like, building little model airplanes or, maybe dabbling around with some art or some music just as a hobby. Because what this does is this creates meaning over time. Again, it's an investment thing. You're not just doing it once for pleasure. You're doing it, and then you're doing it and doing it and doing it, and it becomes this like, after a few years of that, it pays a passive income to you in terms of satisfaction. And then you get good at it. Getting good at something and then exercising that mastered skill, that is a source of deep happiness. For example, you might learn to juggle. Like I taught myself how to juggle. I can juggle, and when I'm juggling, I'm so good at it and it's so effortless, and I'm in a flow state when I'm juggling. It makes me very happy. I can just juggle for 5 minutes and just be happy juggling. Being out in nature is a simple way to be happy. Physical exercise can raise your happiness. It's been proven to show that physical exercise actually changes your brain chemicals and makes it harder for you to be depressed. Good food. By good food, I don't mean pigging out on junk food in a sort of hedonistic way. I mean consistently eating tasty but high quality healthy food. That can make you happy. And preparing your food well, taking responsibility for the food you prepare rather than outsourcing to somebody else. Being healthy can be a source of happiness. Taking charge of your health. After a certain point, you turn your toxic, disgusting lifestyle into a healthy one, and then you derive satisfaction merely from executing on healthy activities or healthy habits. For example, you can walk into a grocery store, walk right past the, disgusting, greasy pizza aisle, and you can feel good just by resisting that and going for, the fruits and vegetables section and getting yourself some, good fruits and vegetables and then juicing them and then drinking a healthy juice back at home. That whole activity, after you train yourself and you change your desires and you kind of adjust your palate and your taste buds, that can be more rewarding than picking out on a pizza. Taking care of yourself, treating yourself with respect. Deep solitude and solo retreats can be a deep source of happiness. One of the happiest I've ever been is on some of the solo retreats that I've done in the middle of the desert or in the middle of the rainforest somewhere. I've done some in Arizona. I've done some in Hawaii. Passion, enthusiasm, and inspiration will make you happy. Living your life with enthusiasm. That takes effort. That's not a default. Because it's easy for life to beat you down and to beat all the enthusiasm and passion and inspiration out of you. You have to develop ways of cultivating and re-inspiring yourself. Humor will make you happy. Develop your humor. I have an old video titled How to Be Funny. Now, the reason that I developed my humor initially is just to get better with attracting women. And it was helpful for that. But nowadays, I exercise my humor. I've turned a habit into, I've developed a habit of exercising my humor almost every day. I exercise my humor. Whenever I'm posting a comment or on the forum section, oftentimes you notice me being funny and posting something snarky or kind of like, clever. That's me exercising my humor. I've been doing it for years. At this point, I'm not even doing it to attract women anymore. I'm doing it because it just makes me happy to be humorous, to be playful. Develop a sort of a playful attitude in the way that you relate to humans, the way you post online, the way you leave your comments, the way you teach, the way you public speak. It'll just make your life like lighter and more enjoyable. Why not? Being serious all the time in your communications, you're just passing up opportunities for free happiness. It's free happiness you're leaving on the table. Building your own house, space, and sanctuary in which you live. Don't underestimate the importance of this. Now, when I say building your own house, I don't literally mean constructing your own house from scratch out of wood. What I mean is just cultivating the space you live in, the space that you spend the most time in, the space where you sleep, where you have sex, where you meditate, where you watch TV, where you jerk off, your living space, right? Where you spend probably half your life. Developing that and investing into it, decorating it, cleaning it up, putting in, whatever infrastructure you need. You want, a water fountain here. You want some plants over there. You want a nice couch over here. Setting it all up. You might say, well, Leo, but this is so materialistic. But I'm not telling you that you got to go out there and buy fancy art and do a gold-plated, toilet in your bathroom to be happy. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is just, it doesn't have to be fancy and expensive. Just you feel a certain sense of investment into your space, and also your space, it makes you feel safe, secure, comfortable. You have a fresh environment with some plants, this kind of stuff. This is really a worthwhile use of your time. Don't just go you buy a space or you rent an apartment and then you don't decorate it, you don't customize it, you just kind of you have boxes everywhere and it's just a mess. You're not gonna be happy in that kind of environment. Take the time to set up your environment to suit yourself. Put in little, creature comforts. For example, what I did on my bed, near my bed, I installed these little lamps that I can just push. They're battery operated. You can just push it and it does light. It's great. It's such an amazing little convenience feature, because usually, when I'm getting up, my bedroom is it's pitch black because all my windows are covered to improve sleep. So it's pitch black in my bedroom, and having to get up and walk to the, all the way to the other wall and turn on the lights this way, having a little thing you can just push there, it's very convenient. Just installing a little thing like that. And then that thing pays dividends for years, because I'll be using that thing for the next 20 years. So turn your living space into a sanctuary and just watch your happiness increase. Doing philosophy is a source of happiness if you do it properly. Now, if you do it improperly, well, then it won't be. Philosophy is very much like marriage. If you're going to do marriage or philosophy, make sure you do it right? Because if you don't do it right, it's going to be a source of deep misery. Developing yourself up the spiral. That's a source of happiness. Self-actualization, growing yourself. Of course, it's also a challenge, right? A lot of these things that generate genuine happiness, they're also a challenge. They're sort of a bittersweet thing. It's not pure raw pleasure. There's a lot of challenge with self-actualization work. There's a lot of challenge with spiritual work. But it's also very satisfying. And after you've built it up, the first few years are going to be especially challenging. But after you build it up and develop some momentum, then most of the challenge goes away, and then it pays dividends. It pays that passive income. Wisdom is a source of happiness, of course. See my episode, What is Wisdom, for more on that. Truth. Being aligned with truth, being honest, avoiding self-deception. This is a key to being happy. You can't be happy if you're going against the truth. Spirituality, spiritual practice, and spiritual connection. These are deep sources of happiness. And now we're getting into some of the most serious forms of happiness. Awakening, exploring consciousness of God, connection to God, meditation, if you develop it sufficiently. When you start off meditation, it's probably not going to make you happy, but if you really work on it and develop it, and it also suits your temperament and genetics and style of mind, then that can be a source of deep happiness. Psychedelics and mystical experiences. Loving yourself, falling in love with yourself. Literally, imagine this, literally falling in love with yourself. How happy do you think that would make you? It's amazing. Most people, it's never even occurred to most people to fall in love with themselves, when that's the most obvious source of happiness. being good. Don't poo-poo this idea of just being good. Being good, literally being good, is what makes you happy. What does it mean to be good? Well, that probably requires a whole separate episode, but for now, use your intuition. Being selfless, that's a source of deep happiness. And finally, love and beauty, just very generally, are some of the highest forms of happiness. One of the deepest forms of happiness that I experience in my life, out of all of the above, is simply appreciation of the beauty of consciousness and reality. I have an episode called How to Fall in Love with Life. Go check that out, where I explain this a little bit more. But literally just sitting alone in my room, looking at the consciousness of my room and recognizing its beauty, or looking at my own body and seeing my own beauty just in my hands. This gives me profound happiness that most humans do not have because they haven't cultivated their capacity to recognize the beauty of consciousness. That's what spirituality gets you. Ultimately, all of my spiritual work, what it's done for me ultimately is it's just made me see the beauty of everything very starkly. And not just the beauty in some sort of like, oh, that's a beautiful thing. No, it's like, no, I see absolute beauty. When I look at a fucking couch or a toilet, I see absolute beauty. Most humans don't. And that's the basic difference. And that's what makes me a lot happier than most people, despite all my health problems and all that kind of stuff. All right, now I'm going to give you two shorter lists here of things specifically that make me happy, just so you can see, because look, the two lists I gave you above, those were general. Now we're going to get specific, because I'm going to want you to make your own lists of specifically what makes you happy. So here's just to get your mind thinking in that direction, to jog your mind, here's a list of what makes me most happy. Being creative, imagining new things, new business ideas. I love having new business ideas, even though the majority of business ideas I have will never get actualized. I don't have time to do them all. I don't have money to do them all. I don't really want to do them all, but there's so many. I just love having new ideas, new creative ideas. For me, the creativity of my mind is one of my greatest sources of joy in life. And then very adjacent to that is exploring my own mind and contemplation, having profound insights and pure understanding of reality. This is my highest joy in life, just purely understanding how something works. For example, for me to understand how, politics works, or how God works, or how happiness works, this by itself makes me very happy. Even if I don't apply it, even if I don't get any money for it or anything like that. Philosophy and truth-seeking are a great source of happiness in my life. Learning new interesting things. I love learning. I love developing my intelligence. To me, that's crucial. I can't be happy without that. Given my personality type, I'm an INTP. For us INTPs, learning is huge. If you're an INTP, you got to be learning all the fucking time. Sometimes I just forget to learn stuff, and then I remind myself a month later, like, oh, I haven't read a book lately, and I'm not feeling happy. It's because I haven't been reading a book, and I haven't been learning new things. Whether it's a book or a podcast or audiobook, whatever. Integrity. Integrity makes me happy. Being in integrity, being a champion of truth makes me very happy. Doing healthy things for myself. Being out in nature, and that's one that I don't do nearly enough. I need to spend more time out in nature. I would be a lot more happier if I did that, but I can be neglectful. Like I said, driving and road trips make me very happy, puts me in a flow state. Sitting down in solitude and just being completely unhurried, not having any kind of schedule that I have to work on, makes me very happy. Being my own boss, having complete creative autonomy, and setting my own schedule makes me very happy. Working on a meaningful project, doing serious and excellent work. For example, if I'm writing my book, or I'm working on a really meaningful Actualized episode, That makes me very happy. In fact, there's some episodes that I work on that are not very like deep episodes. And when I work on those, I'm not very happy. I find it kind of like a chore. But then once in a while, I get an episode that's like really deep, really juicy. Maybe it's one of those epistemic episodes, an episode like, deconstructing the entirety of science. When I'm working on an episode like that's what I consider serious work. When I'm doing my most serious work, that's when I'm the happiest. Exploring consciousness via psychedelics is an enormous source of happiness for me. Just pure appreciation of consciousness and the beauty of consciousness, like I said, is huge for me. Contemplating God and being aware of God is probably my highest source of happiness ever. Music. I'm sort of a connoisseur of music. I'm very picky with the music that I listen to. I'm very careful to curate my lists of music. And so the music that I find that I really love, I've developed some incredible music lists that like nobody has that I just listen to for my own sake. Amazing. Rain makes me super happy, which is kind of unfortunate because I live in Las Vegas where we don't get much rain. Although actually this year we've been getting quite a bit of rain, so I've been enjoying that. But yeah, if I moved somewhere where there's a lot of rain, like the Seattle area, I think I'd be a lot happier. I love like snuggling under a warm blanket in the rain. It's just amazing. Or just like sitting and contemplating for hours in the rain. Amazing. Deep intellectual conversations make me very happy. Thinking about my future makes me happy. Planning and dreaming my future. Because this makes me hopeful. When I'm dreaming and envisioning my future, it's always something hopeful and positive. Makes me feel good about my life. Putting in a full day's work and being productive makes me happy. Having an impact on society, a positive impact, the way that I try to do with this work makes me happy. Innovation and making new discoveries, doing pioneering kinds of work makes me especially happy. I'm not interested in just doing work that others have done. I'm not interested in teaching you what others have taught you. I'm interested in literally discovering new aspects of God, new aspects of spirituality, new ways of doing personal development, new techniques. That's what makes me the happiest. Innovation. Having all day to just sit around, study, contemplate, and imagine makes me super happy. Exercising my humor and being playful, as I said before, makes me happy. Illustration, digital art, graphic design, motion graphics, and cartoon art. I love beautiful computer graphics. That's why I went into video game development in the first place. I love that stuff. It's a great source of joy just looking at it. There's so many talented artists out there. Good food. Appreciation of female nudity, beauty, and sexuality. Most of you can't understand how much happiness I get from pornography. You don't understand. People badmouth porn these days, but they completely misuse porn. They consume porn in a compulsive, addictive way. That's not what I'm talking about when I'm talking about pornography. When I'm talking about pornography, like you can turn pornography into an art form. You can consume it like a connoisseur of art or fine wine, which is what I do. And it provides me enormous happiness. People can't understand this. This kind of porn you can find online if you really search for it is incredible. I mean, you gotta sort through all the crap porn. Like 90% of porn is crap, and then 10% is incredible. You gotta find that 10%. Just finding that 10% is by itself is a journey, an enjoyable journey. Organizing, optimizing, and putting things in order, developing infrastructure in my life. I love to, it makes me feel good just to organize my room, label things. I have a label maker that I use to label stuff. Simple things like this. See, it's these kinds of simple pleasures that are going to really make your life great. Not chasing some sort of party high, drug high, alcohol binge, bender, whatever. That's not where true happiness is found. True happiness is found getting a label maker and placing labels on your folders and organizing your documents. That's more like true happiness. It might seem kind of like boring and uncool, but truly, that's where you're going to find real happiness in life. See my episode called Building your infrastructure for success, where I talk about building infrastructure, investing into infrastructure in your own life. That's very meaningful and rewarding, and it pays dividends. Of course, speaking in front of a camera the way that I am right now on deep topics that I find meaningful and sharing wisdom with people is one of my greatest joys. When I shoot these recordings right now, I've been talking for almost 2 hours. It doesn't feel like 2 hours. It doesn't feel difficult to do this talk. This is easy, effortless. This is the easiest part of my day, is sitting here talking for 2-3 hours about this topic. I'm in a flow state. There's zero effort in putting out this material. It's so enjoyable. It's just pure pleasure doing this. Now, doing the research for these videos, the research I did for this video was probably 10 to 20 hours of research. That was sort of a pain in the ass. That was challenging. I mean, it was somewhat enjoyable, but it was also painful. It's a labor. But when I'm sitting here just talking, when I know what I'm going to be talking about, it's just so effortless. It's so enjoyable. It's like riding a bicycle. Just resting, sitting and resting on my couch. Building my house, like I said. Arranging my house, investing in my house. One of the things that I didn't realize until I bought my house recently, a few years ago, I lived in apartments for 10, 20 years. And you don't even know, if you lived in your apartment or you've rented a place your whole life, you haven't had your own place. There's a big difference between renting a place and actually investing in buying your own place. When you buy your own place, now you're invested in it. You have a lot more reason to actually treat it with respect and to develop it and, upgrade it in the ways that you want and to truly make it yours. That adds this additional layer of meaning to your life that I think many renters just don't appreciate. So, one of the things that'll make you very happy is just buying your own house and investing in it and building it up slowly over time. Also, what makes me happy is reminiscing, just sitting and reflecting on my own life, my own past experiences and memories and lessons, and my own work. Sometimes I will literally just sit down and scroll through my own videos, my own blog, my own posts, my own work, and just look at it and just get joy from seeing the excellent work that I did. Now, some of the work I'm not happy with, but some of it is excellent, and I can look at that and recognize and say, man, that was an amazing piece of work that I did, and that can get me to feel a lot of joy. Now, here's a list of specific things that make me unhappy. First and foremost is chronic health problems and low energy, being tired, exhausted, sleepy. I suffer from that a lot, and it's probably the biggest source of misery in my life. And I've tried so many different things to fix it. I've tried literally hundreds of supplements, gone to dozens of doctors, tried a bunch of different medicines, everything under the sun, changed my diet, everything. I've done everything. I've done everything I can to optimize it, but in the end, there's only so much you can do given your genetics. And so then you got to surrender to the rest of it, the stuff you're not able to fix. And specifically, what kills me the most about that is that I love being productive and creative, which requires a lot of energy, and it requires good health. And so my health problems affect my ability to be creative and productive in the ways that I expect of myself. And so not being able to meet my own standards for my own productivity and work. Some days I'm just not able to work because I don't feel so good in my body. I literally can't sit and do one of these episodes because I don't feel good. In fact, for the last few days, I wanted to shoot this episode over the weekend to release it on time, usually on a Sunday. I couldn't shoot it because I felt so bad. I was feeling so miserable for 2 days just physically that I couldn't record. I couldn't do any work. And that's a great source of misery for me, just because I'm not meeting my own standards. Now, if I dropped my standards, that misery would go away. But I don't want to drop those standards because core to my identity is that I'm a creative person and I want to be productive, and I'm not willing to surrender that. So for me, that's probably my biggest source of unhappiness in life. And there's not much I can do to control that beyond what I've already done. Believe me, I've done so much to try to fix it. I wish there was something I could do. Being on a strict schedule makes me very unhappy. The stress of having a deadline, being in a rush to finish something, because every time that I feel I have a deadline, I feel like I'm not doing excellent work. I feel like it's not the best that it can be. So I hate working that way, which is why I love working for myself and not having any kind of schedule. What else makes me very unhappy is having to do things just for money. I hate that. I absolutely hate that. It goes against every value that I have. Also, doing work that I don't believe in. I hate that as well. Having a boss tell me what to do. I hate that. Fear of running out of money. That's a source. That's been a persistent source of suffering and unhappiness in my life. And it's funny because it's not that I really am short on money. I'm fine on money. I'm not going to run out of money, but that fear is such a deep-seated fear that I have from like my childhood and some trauma that I had there with respect to money that it still kind of haunts me. And that's a really difficult one. If you have trauma from the past, oh man, that's going to make you so miserable. You need to work as much as you can to sort of heal that trauma and get over it. But it's very difficult if you have like, especially early childhood trauma, it's very difficult to just completely get over it. Wasting money is also something that makes me unhappy. Having to do menial chores like taxes, paying bills, and other kinds of meaningless administrative work like that. I hate that. Socializing and being around people for too long. I notice that if I'm around people for several days straight, I become very miserable and unhappy. The happiest that I am is by myself. I'm never going to be as happy with another person as I am by myself. That's just something about me. Now, that's just me. That's not going to be true for most people, but that's how it works for me because I'm very introverted. Having to manage people. I don't like managing people. I like doing my own creative work, but I don't like having 20 people to manage. Like me being the boss for 20 people, to me, that's hell. Because when I'm managing the work of 20 other people, I can't be doing my own creative work, which is what I really enjoy doing the most. Realizing when I've behaved in a bad or egotistical way, that makes me unhappy. Emotionally hurting others makes me unhappy. Being lazy in a rut, not having some project to work on makes me very unhappy. Arguing, debating, yelling, conflict, and violence makes me very unhappy. Arguing with people online is, sometimes I get into that, arguing on the forum or something. It's always a source of misery and I regret it. Smartphone addiction makes me unhappy. I do have a bit of that. Chronic loud noise, like I said, makes me very unhappy. Overeating junk food makes me unhappy. Having a bunch of social obligations such that I can't sit alone and contemplate at peace makes me unhappy. Meditation and spiritual chasing makes me unhappy. I don't like meditating, to be honest. It's not a source of happiness for me. And the reason that is, and it took me a long time to figure this out because I was so gaslit by this Buddhist nonsense. These Buddhists try to convince you that meditation is the end-all, be-all of happiness, and that's where all of it is, and nowhere else. And that if you're not happy meditating, then you're just bad or something. No, I've tried it for years, and what I realized is just my mind is not wired for it. I have an extremely creative mind. My mind is so creative. Trying to shut off my mind and just sitting there like a dumb animal, to me, this leads to a lot of deep unhappiness. What I enjoy is contemplating, and I enjoy consciousness, but I don't enjoy sitting and meditating or doing some rigorous, monotonous meditation technique, like some sort of breath counting technique or some sort of chanting technique. I really don't like that. It doesn't suit my personality style. And see, some Buddhists will say, no, Leo, it works for everybody and it suits everybody. You're just not doing it right. It's like, no, that's wrong. That's just wrong. It took me 5 to 10 years to discover that through painful trial and error, so I'm just sharing some of my lessons with you, just in case you have a kind of mind like me. So be careful with meditation. Figure out whether it really makes you happy or not. Which is not to say that I don't do it. I still do it, Not everything in life you're going to do just because it makes you happy. And sometimes you got to try things that, are healthy for you, but aren't necessarily making you the happiest. So I still meditate. I still do retreats and stuff like that. What else makes me unhappy? Overworking. Working so much that it's like mind-numbing, exhausting. I'm exhausted at the end of the day. My mind is numb. Grinding, repetitive work. I hate that. Bad, unwise investments and losing money makes me unhappy. And lastly, drama. I hate fucking drama. Drama makes me unhappy. When people create drama in my life, I don't like it. Which is one of the reasons why I keep myself pretty solitary, because that's the best way to avoid all the drama. Now, the above is just some of my personal preferences. I'm not saying this will work for you. I'm just saying what works for me. The point is that I want to inspire you to discover what works for you. So figure that out. Now, a few last points. Here are some of the most advanced points about happiness that I want to make. These are some more existential and kind of metaphysical and spiritual points. In certain ways, spirituality has reduced my overall happiness. Looking back at the last 10 years of doing spiritual work, I realized that really, I was happier when I was just working on earthly things before I even knew about what spirituality was. When I was just being creative. Because for me, that's where happiness is found. It's in creativity. Creativity puts me into flow. Sitting there doing nothing doesn't put me into flow, and it feels like a waste of my life. And also because I'm a very ambitious person. So for me, sitting, doing nothing, and meditating, this is not enough to be satisfied with life. I must be innovative and creative to be happy. My mind also requires quite a bit of variety in order to generate that creativity. See, it's not an accident that the mind wants variety. Creativity demands variety. You can't be creative. You can't do the kind of work that I do by sitting and meditating with your mind shut off. It took me a long time to recognize that. The mind has to be very active to generate this kind of work, to generate these insights. Which is why your Buddhist teachers don't teach you this stuff. Because when they're sitting in samadhi for 10 hours straight, they're not thinking, they're not generating any new ideas. Now, of course, they're going to rationalize and say, well, you don't need any new ideas, just sit in samadhi for 10 hours straight. Fine, if you're the kind of person that's happy with sitting in samadhi for 10 hours straight or living in a cave your whole life, do that if that works for you. That doesn't work for me. I'm just being honest with you. It doesn't work for me. I'm just stressing this point for those of you who might be kind of falling into this trap as well. I just want you to double check, is spirituality actually making you happier? Now, don't get me wrong, because it might sound like, well, Leo, so do you regret doing spirituality? No, of course not. And like I said before, the greatest joy I get is sitting on the couch and contemplating the nature of God and being conscious of God, right? So I'm fully into spirituality. I don't regret it at all. And like I said before, the greatest thing that spirituality has given me is just my ability to recognize the absolute beauty of consciousness. That's why I do spirituality. It's not to sit in meditation and samadhi state and shut off my mind. It's to be able to look at what I see before me and to recognize how amazing and beautiful it is, how miraculous it is, and to have that spiritual connection with the world. So I wouldn't give that up for anything. I don't regret that at all. It's just that recognize that there's different ways to go about doing spirituality. Find the ways that resonate with you, that are suitable to your genetics, your talents, your skills, and your temperament. Now, as a warning, I should say, trying too hard to be happy will make you unhappy. That's what's counterintuitive about this. So don't get too preoccupied with this Buddhist idea of escaping suffering. This is also a trap. Realistically, you're never going to escape suffering. There will always be suffering in your life. Now, some might say, well, Leo, but what about those Buddhist monks who light themselves on fire with gasoline and then they're still happy? Look, if 1 in a million of you wants to become a professional hardcore Buddhist monk, and you want to spend the next 20 years meditating 10 hours a day in order to train your mind to literally transcend suffering, I'm not denying that that kind of thing is possible. I'm just saying that that's a very specific training you need to go through. By the way, that training is not God realization. That training is not awakening. That training does not mean you understand what God is or what reality is. That's a completely separate thing. Now, I'm not saying it's bad. It might be great. But the reality is that most of you are not going to do that. I'm not going to do that realistically in my life. I'm not really even interested in doing that. It's just not something I'm interested in. So if you're going to go the full, Buddhist monk route, fine, go for it. But then for all you other people who are not going to do that, who are going to have a family and have a job and be creative and be artistic and do all this other kind of stuff, for you, like for me, you're not going to escape suffering. So drop that idea, because that by itself, that idea will create a lot of suffering for you. Instead, what you do is you just stop caring about suffering. If you're suffering, just like you can suffer and like really care about it so much that you want to escape it. This will double your suffering. Or you can have suffering and pain in your life, and it's just kind of like, well, I don't care. I got other things I'm going to be doing tomorrow anyways. And it just it just kind of goes, and it goes through your system. You're not really resisting it, and then it hardly even matters at that point anymore. So, again, rather than trying to be happy every single day or every moment of your day, focus on investing into developing a great life and living virtuously according to all these principles. That's what's going to generate contentment and satisfaction for you. Don't worry about how to maximize pleasure or how to escape all suffering. Focus on building a meaningful life, and then the joy will come. The deepest happiness comes in doing things for their own sake, not as a means to some other end. This is very important. There's going to be things in life you do not because you want to do them, or because you find them meaningful, or because you find them beautiful or good, but simply because you need to reach something else. Happiness will not come from that. Happiness will come from doing those things that you find beautiful and meaningful for their own sake. And a lot of times those things are not going to be the things that society rewards you for, the things that your clients want to pay you for, or the things that people will praise you for, or the things that you can show off to people, or something that's flashy. For example, for me, an example of doing something for its own sake is just driving. Not to get somewhere. I don't care where I'm going. I can get in my car right now and just drive around in circles. It doesn't matter. But I will get deep joy from that because I enjoy driving for its own sake, not to get somewhere. So I want you to think about what are the things that you enjoy doing for their own sake and not as a means to some end. That's the key to your happiness. Now let me talk about the highest happiness. There's a spectrum of happiness. I have an old episode called The Happiness Spectrum, which talks about sort of a spectrum of happiness. There's lower grades of happiness, medium grades, and higher grades, and then there's the highest grade. The highest grade of happiness is consciousness. Consciousness itself, the appreciation of consciousness and connection to God, seeing the beauty in everything. This is the highest happiness. There is no higher happiness you can have than when you realize what God is and how God is structured. Literally, the contemplation of the metaphysical structure of reality and God are the greatest source of joy. This joy goes beyond joy into something called ecstasy. Ecstasy is not a drug that you take. Ecstasy, this is something I'll have an episode on in the future, just explaining what ecstasy is. Most people don't know what ecstasy is. Ecstasy is not a state of extreme pleasure, like, oh, you're having an orgasm, it's ecstasy. No, an orgasm doesn't rise to the level of ecstasy. Ecstasy is when you become conscious of God so deeply that you're drowning in an ocean of infinite love. It's a transcendent religious mystical experience. Ecstasy is mystical, it's metaphysical, it's not material pleasure. Humans barely comprehend what this is because so few of them have experienced it. Now, can you be in a state of ecstasy all the time? No. Realistically, ecstasy is going to be something you experience a little bit rarely here and there. Nor should you want to be in a perpetual state of ecstasy. There's no need for that. Some yogis will talk about sitting there and blissing out on ecstasy for hours and days. Of course, if you want, you can do that. Realistically, to reach that, you would need to become a professional full-time monk/yogi. If you want, you can do that. Realistically, most of you won't do that, so it's pointless to talk about it. But that ecstasy, it's not just a temporary thing. I mean, it is. It's a temporary pleasure, but it also transforms you. It has a purifying effect on your psyche, which changes you subtly and makes you sort of more spiritually attuned, generally speaking, throughout your life. And it grows you, it purifies you of defilements and karma, bad karmas, as they say. So all that is very good stuff. If you're really serious about happiness, if you want the highest forms of happiness, you got to get serious about God. There's no two ways about this. But a little bit more down to earth, for those of you who are not going to go that far, start training yourself just to maximize your appreciation of simple everyday things in life. This is where real happiness, the majority of your happiness, rather, I should say, will come from. For example, after a long day's work, you have some time off to just sit down, relax, and read a book. And when you do that, the next time you do that, just appreciate it and really, soak it up. That's going to be true happiness right there. Or as you go outside your house before you drive to work, you look at the plants and the trees and you notice how beautiful nature is, how beautiful the mountains are outside your house. That's where the majority of your happiness should come from. This kind of appreciation. You cultivate your mind to be such that you appreciate the very ordinary things around you. You're not looking for something super magical or special. You don't need to go to a party or fly to the Bahamas and sip a pina colada on the beach in some resort to really appreciate life. You just appreciate the simple things in life that are all around you. And remember that happiness is not about achieving some big goal. If you're ambitious, of course, go and pursue your big goals. But as you do that, don't get lost in waiting for some, big payday at the end to come. It's like when I finish my business, that's when I'll get all my happiness. No, it's about the journey. You got to derive the happiness on your way towards building your big business. Try to enjoy the whole process. Actually, if you're building a business, you can do it in a way where you're just kind of grinding through it just to get to the end. Or you can do it in a way where you actually enjoy the day-to-day of it. Make sure you do it that way. Because there's not going to be some payday 10 years from now where you're done with your business and then finally you sell it for $10 million, then you move to the Bahamas and finally you're going to be, in a state of bliss. That's not going to happen. Stop waiting for achievements to make you happy. Be happy in the doing of your everyday life. And then appreciate the little moments along the way. And ultimately, I challenge you and I want you to develop yourself to the point where you can just sit on your couch doing nothing and just be welling up with joy and tears at the beauty of consciousness and existence, because you're so conscious and you're so spiritually attuned that that's all you need. The radiance of your visual field, the divinity of your visual field is so apparent to you that it's enough to make you happy. This is the happiness of existence. This is where it's really at. Okay? We're wrapping up here. I want to leave you with the homework assignment. The homework assignment is going to be creating your happiness journal. In this happiness journal, I want you to contemplate, in general, what makes for happiness, what makes for the good life. Start contemplating that. And then specifically, what makes you happy? Start keeping a log of things that make you happy in your commonplace book. Go see my episode called How to Keep a Commonplace Book. In that commonplace book, you're going to create a new entry called your happiness journal. In this happiness journal, you're going to keep a log of specifically things that make you happy. And this is not, you can sit down and kind of generate a little bit of this list now, but ultimately, this list has to come over the next, weeks, months, and even year as you're observing your activities throughout life. Every time something happens to you in life, it can be a little thing or a big thing that makes you happy, you're going to write it down in this journal. So maybe, let's say your partner tells you that he or she loves you and that makes you feel happy. Okay, so you write that down. When my partner tells me that they love me, that makes me feel happy. And then the next thing is maybe when your cat cuddles with you, that makes you feel happy. You're going to write that down. Cat cuddling with me makes me feel happy. And likewise, you're going to keep a list of things that make you feel unhappy. So, when someone is yelling at me, that makes me feel unhappy. You write that down. When I have to do work for my boss, that makes me feel unhappy. And you just write that down. And this list can have hundreds of items. And you're going to be growing this list over the next year. Slowly growing it and growing it and growing it. Until eventually, you're going to be able to look at this list and you're going to have a big picture view of what it takes for you to be happy and what are the things that are holding you back from happiness. You can also check out my episode called How to Contemplate Using a Journal, which will help you with this exercise. Let's see. That's about it. A very comprehensive look at what happiness is. The final thing I want to say is make sure you don't get the wrong idea here. The whole point of all of these teachings is to have you explore how your own mind works. I'm not interested in brainwashing you here with beliefs about happiness or spirituality or God or any of this kind of stuff. Whether you believe me or not is irrelevant. What matters is that you explore your own mind and you see how it works for you, however it works. What's true is what's true for you, not what I tell you is true. I give you general conclusions that I've come to by exploring my own inner workings of my mind, but your mind might work differently in certain cases. There's going to be a lot of overlap between your mind and my mind, but it's not going to be 100% overlap. So you got to test these things that I teach you. All these things, feel free to test them and to find the ones that work. And then the ones that are not validated by your own experience, then consider them untrue. That's how I want you to treat this work, not as some kind of ideology. Right? This is a non-dogmatic set of teachings grounded in direct experience, not in speculation. The things that I say are true not because I read them in a book, not because some PhD psychologist validated them or put a rubber stamp on it, or because some committee at Harvard says this is how things work. It's true because this is how it is in your direct experience. That's what validates it and makes it true or false if it doesn't validate. Now, of course, you have to be careful because some of the things I talk about, especially the most advanced stuff, some of the spiritual stuff, can take a long time to validate. You might not be able to validate some of these things for years, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. You should try. And also you have to remember that there's self-deception going on. See my episode, Self-Deception, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3. So self-deception is going on. So certain things may fail to validate because you don't want them to validate, or because you're threatened by them being validated, or because you have various emotional blockages, or because you're just self-deceived, or you're not being careful enough in how you're using your consciousness because your mind is very tricky. Your mind doesn't want you to see everything very clearly, because if it did, a lot of the old ways of living, a lot of your old values and habits and so forth will become untenable. You're going to have to give those up, and you might not want to give those up. You might not be ready to give those up because you haven't burned through that karma yet. You haven't surrendered to it yet. You're not mature enough yet. So it's a process. But everything you're doing here has to be grounded in your direct experience. Just remember that.